discussion. So if the speakers from this afternoon's portion of the session, the commercial ready session, would come on up, we'll bring up a couple of extra chairs, and Carried Rexroad is going to moderate the panel discussion. So please stay, and we want our audience participation in this to get the variety of perspectives.
So this is the commercially ready section, and this is part of, as was mentioned this morning, a conversation that we've had over the last couple of years, starting with a workshop at Harbor Branch and the survey, which many of us participated in, and culminating in this session here today. And so kind of what we're looking for is a guide or some kind of reference report for researchers, funding agencies, the industry, investors, and other stakeholders to kind of give folks an idea of where we're at with all these species, how ready they are to move forward. And so similar to the format we had this morning, not everybody was in here for every talk, so I'm just going to ask our speakers to hit the major points of what are the major barriers to commercialization or expanding production as you see it. And so if we can do that, and then we'll have some other questions as well.
Thank you. I covered Florida Pompano, and basically it's commercially ready. It's being produced commercially in Panama. There's a juvenile operation in Florida right now. It's soon to be an RES facility in Florida. The major issues right now that we need more research on, more information on, is genetics and breeding. We have limited information on that. We don't have any captive stocks right now that are being manipulated or improved right now. To speak of, no long-term breeding program has been established. Disease management strategies, we need more information on that with vaccines for viruses and prevention and strategies to reduce bacterial infections in RAS systems. Also, the early maturation, there needs to be some studies done in that to look into that to improve production, especially toward the latter stages of production. Economic and business plan development, that's a key issue that we really need to get more information on to make the industry more profitable and for investors to buy into it. Market developments, Pompano is well known in the Gulf and the Southeast and up in New England, but not so much inland in the U.S., even though it's a very high value species. And feed, diet development for grow out. Most of the studies so far have focused on juvenile fish, which is again an artifact of the facilities available at universities and agencies. They just have smaller tanks typically.
Hello, Todd Sink. I covered commercial status for red drum aquaculture as a commercially ready species. Like I said, I probably have one of the easiest jobs because it's been in production so long in the U.S. Markets are well established. We don't have a lot of culture issues or a whole lot more to work out in terms of getting product to market. Part of our major impediments right now are we have lack of availability of fingerlings. We primarily have small hatcheries that produce for their own production purposes and don't sell wholesale to other people very often. The other kind of major issue is we have a kind of a lack of training of people that are experts in hatchery management in this field. Most of the people, there's probably a dozen people in the United States that could walk in and manage a redfish hatchery right now. And most of those are getting close to retirement age, and we're not getting a lot of new hatchery managers trained. So that is one impediment. Another impediment is just plain infrastructure. We need more hatcheries. We have lots of producers out there that want fingerlings, will produce fingerlings in multiple systems. They just cannot get their hands on them. And so from that standpoint, that's our largest hurdle to get over. The market is far from saturated. We actually have restaurants and fish wholesalers that are buying farms themselves just to make sure they can maintain their supply line because we're falling short of meeting the market demand. Major areas where research emphasis could really start to be applied to red drum is really the genetic improvement of the species. Selecting for improved reproduction and faster growth rates, larger size, and cleaning up the carcass yield a little bit. Red drums do have a rather large head, and some of that could be bred down. Otherwise, we're really pretty ready for commercial production.
My name is John Stieglitz. I spoke today about olive flounder production. So as far as commercial species go, it's pretty ready to go. It's in commercial production in other parts of the world, particularly South Korea. Over 80% of the production. They produce almost 50,000 metric tons of the species, so they've got it figured out. So as far as production in the U.S. goes, I mentioned in the presentation some of the key points. We need systems at a cost that can grow the species in the U.S. Okay, so a lot of the marine research systems that we see on the market or that people are developing, they're not able to function in an economical way so that a producer can make that leap into commercial production. And a lot of investors, we have a lot of investor interest in the species. They want to see it done. So they say, show me, right? Show me the commercial flounder producer in the U.S. that's making money. Can't do that, right? For a lot of these species, it's hard to do that. And so for an investor to say, somebody mentioned business planning, I think that's a key hurdle. We need a lot of businesses that are successful, they don't necessarily want to release that information to all of their potential competition, but we do need some of that. Maybe this is an opportunity for grant funds for funding business development, business incubation for this type of thing, where folks can see a pilot scale production facility and see the numbers behind it. Let them make the decision. Say, okay, here are the numbers, it's fully transparent, here's how much the system costs, all that, and it also provides an opportunity to train individuals. As you mentioned, there's a sort of a lack of knowledge out there in terms of operating a commercial marine research system in the U.S. So those are some of the points that were mentioned.
Okay, I'm Rick Getz, and I talked about the sablefish aquaculture and as a commercially ready species. And I think I agree with what you said. What we've had now is we really have developed kind of the tools to get from eggs to commercial product. And yeah, we can refine all of that. We can make that better. I think we can make it much more cost effective. But really the issue with sablefish right now is grow out. We really need to have pilot projects growing out with industry, this is my feeling, because we don't really have that now. There is commercial grow out in Canada. It is successful, but on a small basis. This fish is a very high valued species that when you look at it on the retail market, it's actually going for the same price as halibut. So when you look at the cost of some of these fish, this is really a high valued fish, yet we don't have a commercial production. So the question is, why don't we have that? Well, if you look at where this fish is going to be grown out, it's going to be grown out in the Pacific Northwest. So I don't want to open up a can, but here, if we have to do net pen aquaculture in the Pacific Northwest, we have to address these issues of net pen aquaculture in that state, in that particular area. This is something that's complicated, and it's obviously something that we have to address in order to be able to go forward. The only other way to actually do this fish is to do it with recirculation aquaculture. And so we have to also have pilot scale projects to really investigate that. And one thing I didn't mention in my talk, which is important, is that NOAA has funded an economic and market assessment for this fish. And I've seen the draft of that, and it's not complete yet, but it will be out, I think, probably within 6 months. And I would assume that NOAA would make that available to the public so they can actually see, one, what the market value is for this fish, and also, is there going to be a conflict with the fisheries that exist for that? It's a small fisheries, but that's also a concern, and that's dealt with in this market analysis. And I feel, after reading this draft, that there isn't an issue, and in the past there has been some economic assessments of that, which suggests that there would not be a conflict with the fisheries. That's just another aspect of the marketing of it. But you know, to me, the bottom line is we need to get some commercial scale production in the U.S. in some way, and so we have to really push that.
Ben Benetti, I've covered cobia. I think I made it clear that the technology for producing cobia from egg to market is absolutely mastered, not just by ourselves, but a number of other countries. But again, it's not for the faint at heart. Most people who have tried, in most countries that have tried to raise cobia, failed. There have been enormous failures, and the reason for that is that I think we were part of creating that myth that it grows so fast, it's great, it has great biological characteristics, outstanding, to eat, great market, but in reality, most people don't know what it is to begin with. We all know what a cobia is, but the layman won't know. The reason most people have failed and most companies have failed is because they could not meet the nutritional and environmental requirements of cobia. It is extremely difficult, and it is not a coincidence that open blue in the offshore environment is the only one that is left that continues to raise cobia. It's because they have been the only ones who actually managed to fulfill the nutritional requirements and the environmental requirements of cobia, because they're in a high energy environment in the offshore. But with that, it costs astronomically high, and so they have to sell the fish for a high price in the market, which they then reach this white fish market that has other offers. I'm not sure if I'm being articulated enough, but the bottom line is that yes, we can do it, but take into consideration that it's not doable in recirculating system in ponds or in near shore or in conditions that won't fulfill those requirements. It is not for the faint at heart, as I said. We have seen too many failures, and we discourage most people who come to us to raise cobia. We discourage them. 9 out of 10 of the people, trying to raise cobia, we basically just don't let them. And the only country, all of those that are listed, including in Asia, that we were not involved, is Taiwan. And Taiwan has been requesting eggs from our broodstock now, which we won't sell, because we have this agreement with Open Blue. We don't want to create, market advantage for third parties.
My name is Jorge and Arne, and I spoke about Atlantic cod version 2.0. I think this species was one that is really part of the larger seafood market, one where there's price sensitivity. And I think the reemergence of this species has been built on the technical advances that have been made in Norway, Canada, Iceland, and a little bit in the United States. And it's going to be dependent on that market sensitivity and pricing, and are we able to take advantage of the improved genetics for that species to take hold again. But I also would like to say it's very dependent upon the hatchery work, the broodstock work that has to take place in the United States, and that's not just for cod. I want to digress and speak a little bit about what we need, whether it's red drum, sablefish, cobia, white sea bass. We have very few commercial hatcheries able to produce product and make it available to a third party on a commercial level year-round, rather than a supply that would get you started in investors and people that are coming into this area, you know, they need the confidence there's going to be a hatchery that's capable of growing and building their farm collaboratively. And that's, in my opinion, what's really been holding back some of these efforts. We can move to pilot scale demonstrations, but what's that next step to commercialize the industry? We need to move past that pilot scale to commercial scale. And if we don't have the infrastructure in place, which in my language is a commercial hatchery to supply that, and to give confidence to the companies that want to get into this, who will eventually then build their own hatchery, it's difficult for us to commercialize this effort. Our efforts to commercialize species in the past was only built on the fact that we had a year-round commercial hatchery that could produce month in, month out. And I think that is going to be the basis for growth here in the States.
Thanks. My name is Mark Drawbridge. I'm with SeaWorld Research Institute in San Diego, and I presented on white sea bass, which is actually a regionally very popular croaker or cyanid fish. Has a long culture history in our area, primarily for stock replenishment. So what I reported on was the fact that we can produce a lot of fish. The spawning is locked in, it's year-round. There's a lot of good things going for it. I reported on a couple pilot projects that have been done, one that we did that resulted in market testing at the end, showed very favorable results. Again, fairly small scale. We did another project working in collaboration with Pacifico Aquaculture in Mexico, again, where they generated, and that's a commercial farm, where they generated some really good preliminary information. So we've got a lot of good information. We've got some interesting things going on in Southern California. I think for us, and what Fedi alluded to in his presentation and he'll expand on, is we're in the process now of trying to get permits for a commercial offshore farm. So for us, then it becomes, that's really the next best big step for us. And then in the context of white sea bass, for us, we're going to be permitting, at least what will go in on the application, is 3 different species. California yellowtail, which Fedi reported on, the white sea bass, which I reported on, and then one that we didn't report on, but Benjamin talked about, and that's striped bass. And that's a species, so in that context, our first choice is going to be California yellowtail, because of the market value, fast growth, and so forth. So where white sea bass fits into this kind of remains to be seen, but it'll be interesting to have that opportunity, you know, commercial scale cages and infrastructure and all that. My guess is that, you know, yellowtail will go in, hopefully do well, make some money, and then they'll have an opportunity to explore white sea bass further and at a larger scale. So one of the things that's interesting is that if you look at what's going on in Mexico right across the border, we've done some work with them, with yellowtail, with white sea bass, and with striped bass. So they're basically further down the road of what the scenario I just described in Southern California, and they've already selected yellowtail and striped bass to work with. So in terms of prioritizing species, that's the approach they've taken. For us in San Diego and California in general, it's going to get interesting because striped bass is not a truly native species. It was established there in the late 1800s, so it's there. But we've heard from various state and federal regulatory agencies that they might not be real keen on actually seeing that come to fruition. So that remains to be seen whether or not that's going to be a viable candidate. Presumably, if there's a farm that goes in and demonstrates a good history of non-escapement, you know, hopefully that might trigger that to allow that to happen. But otherwise, they're being grown right across the border and marketed in Los Angeles. So anyway, that's kind of the outlook for us. So in terms of research and that sort of thing, a lot of what we've done so far has been funded through the recreational fishing community and then other grants in terms of nutrition development and so forth. But again, I think white sea bass will be a kind of a backup species or a secondary species in our region.
Thanks, Mark. So my name is Federico Rotman. I also work with SeaWorld Research Institute. I presented on Areola dorsalis, California yellowtail. At Hubs, we have an operational California yellowtail hatchery capable of producing small quantities of commercial quantities of fingerlings. As Mark mentioned, we are currently in the process of seeking permits to put a farm offshore in San Diego. As far as the potential for the species, a very close cousin, Areola landi, is currently being produced in commercial quantities in South Australia, and they're actually profitable now. And this would be a very similar model as to what they're doing. Yeah, it's there are some improvements that we certainly can make, and everything from hatchery technology to feeds to quality of the fish, but the species is ready for commercial production. We just need the place to do it.
My name's Neil Anthony Sims, and I'm with Kampachi Farms, based in Kona, Hawaii, with our commercial operation in La Paz in Mexico. We're also trying to develop a demonstration project offshore of Sarasota for Areola revolviana. So it's very closely related to the other Areolas, sibling species to Merrillii, which Kevin spoke about this morning. We've been in the market with this fish from Kona Blue Water Farms originally in 2005, and now Blue Ocean Mariculture has been producing out of Hawaii, and so the technology is available. It's just a question of location, fish health management, and scale. And that's why we are looking it's why we're in Mexico and why we are looking at the Gulf of Mexico. Because if you're going to go and do this at 500 tons a year, which is about the production that we had when we were coming out of Hawaii, and that's about the level of production that Blue Ocean Mariculture is at now. That's great if you can maintain a very high price point, but you're not moving a needle in terms of changing the way the world views seafood. And that's what we as a company feel, and I think that's what we all feel we want to be able to achieve. The limitations on this species are that the very high price point limits the market entry, the familiarity with the species. It's a very expensive feed. We're doing a lot of work. We've been doing a lot of work over the years with the soy industry. We're also looking at reducing the lipid level in the diet and the challenges of fish health management. We sometimes joke to each other about how the real challenge with revolviana is not so much trying to get Areola revolviana to grow as trying to make sure that Neobenedenia don't grow. That's the best solution to that is in the copper alloy mesh cages, but that's breathtakingly expensive. We sometimes joke that maybe they'd be cheaper if they were gold plated. And so it's a very expensive prospect. We believe that a standalone hatchery isn't the way to go. If you go and build a hatchery to produce the fingerlings, who's going to buy the fingerlings? If you go and build a farm relying on somebody else to provide the hatchery, that's like, you have to have an integrated hatchery with your operation. So it's a very large investment. We'd like to think that there are other companies out there that will join us in this species because we're building an industry. And that's the feeling, sense that we have here, and I think that's the sense that we all have here on this panel. If I can just make one last observation. If you look at the makeup of this panel, it perhaps suggests that US marine fish culture is failing very badly in the area of gender bias, and maybe we all need to be a little bit more conscious about that going forward. Sorry, myself. I've got a daughter in biology.
What temperature have you guys cultured at?
My name is Wade Watanabe, and I presented on US Aquaculture. Speaking from the perspective of the farmers that I work with, they like the species because it has a well-respected market reputation. They feel like they don't have to undertake a heavy marketing campaign to sell these fish here in the U.S. They like the fact that it can be grown in our neighborhood around North Carolina on the eastern seaboard in land-based systems where it's relatively difficult, at least now, to grow fish in offshore systems in the southeastern to mid-Atlantic region. And they like the fact that we're in close proximity of the major metro markets that range from Atlanta to the south to Washington, D.C., Philly, Boston, Toronto, New York City to the north. And they like the fact that they can sell the fish at relatively small sizes for premium prices in the 1 pound to 1.5 pound range without any processing. Live would be the best way to sell these fish, but also oil on ice. But I agree with George. One of the first questions they asked me is, okay, this is a great deal. The university has a project and they can supply us with fingerlings to do some grow-out trials. What about when your project starts? Where am I going to get my fingerlings at that point in time? So it's a conundrum. And I think the university and other hatchery organizations, nonprofit organizations, have a role in sort of bridging the gap between a startup pilot scale industry to the integrated hatchery that Neil referred to as going to be essential down the road. The species, as I indicated in my presentation, has some technical challenges, one being growth variation. You get average growth rates, but then you get minimum size and maximum size going way below and way above, and that affects your economics. So how do we correct that? It could be simple grading. We just haven't had the opportunity to study that on a formal basis. You know, letting the fast growers take off, and then hopefully moving the slow growers to another system and then compensate growth. That's a possibility. The other thing is when you know when to cull and how deep, because there's going to be a certain percentage of fish that are bound never to reach a premium size. So how do you figure that out? It's going to take research. But those kinds of experimental questions I think are relatively tractable and soluble. Just need the time and energy and resources to do it. And also, control of sexual maturation. I won't go too much into detail because this is a protogynous hermaphrodite. We don't understand how sex is controlled, so it's difficult to develop a strategy to manipulate their chromosomes and control sex. So that's a concern. But also selective breeding and domestication. We want to do that. We have the inclination to just keep selecting the best lookers and the fastest growers, but we're worried about inadvertently inbreeding, and so we just keep going out for wild stock. And so we're sort of stuck in first gear all the time. So that's going to be a very important process going forward. And I think the growth variation that they show indicates that there is a potential for taking advantage of that.
Ben Reading, North Carolina State University, and I spoke about striped bass, and also I direct the domestic breeding program for striped bass for the U.S. hybrid striped bass industry. So we've got domesticated strains of fishes, 6th generation domesticated striped bass They're primarily used for the hybrid striped bass industry, but the point of my talk was to indicate that nothing stops us from using those for a straight striped bass industry. And as Mark had indicated, you know, right now the hybrid striped bass industry is about 11 million pounds a year in the U.S., and then you've got companies like Pacifico that are producing millions of pounds of striped bass. And they're commercially available in markets like Whole Seafood, or Whole Foods market. So there's a pretty big market there for striped bass. And the other major points in my talk were, you know, entire books have been written on the culture of striped bass. So there's really no problem with us technically raising these animals. That's pretty much all been worked out. The question then is should we raise them and can you make money doing that? And that some of the older studies may need to be recapitulated in the sense that back in the 80s, when the hybrid striped bass industry started, a lot of those studies were done using the points that have been brought up here, wild origin fish, before we had domesticated animals. And so we know that through, say, 5 or 6 generations of captive breeding, you get an enhanced performance. The animals that don't take to feed all that well do a lot better after a few generations of selection. They handle stress better, they handle crowding, things like this, and so their overall growth performance is improved. And also their ability to tolerate things like crowding is improved. So a lot of those older studies need to be redone using the more recently domesticated fish. Another important thing about striped bass, perhaps, that is maybe underscored is the fact that it is a euryhaline species. It grows just as well in freshwater as it does in marine water and also brackish water. So we can grow these fish in any kind of condition, and they do pretty good. They've got similar FCRs and similar specific growth rate in those 3 environments. We've got very good captive breeding protocols now that we've bred. For example, one of the traits that we've bred for over the years is the fish are now capable of spawning in captivity without hormone induction. And so we can do this with photothermal manipulations, and we don't need to use HCG or GnRH any longer to spawn striped bass, which is remarkable, seeing that it's a very difficult species to spawn in captivity for the females. Also, Curry Woods has done a lot of work on sperm cryopreservation, and we've actually got some of the semen already stored at the USDA germplasm repository for animals, and that protocol's been worked out so we can distribute seed across the country potentially for males from our breeding program. The striped bass genome is sequenced, and so we can use that as a powerful tool for future breeding efforts and also for physiology on the animal. So genome resources are available. Some of the weaknesses that I indicated in our list on the abstract includes an intolerance of warmer water. So when we look at the culture systems, offshore culture or pond-based culture, which is what the typical hybrid striped bass industry is based on, and wrasse, striped bass don't tolerate warm water that you'd expect for the summer in the southeastern U.S. in the 2nd year of production. They can tolerate this at age 1, but once they get to age 2, they don't tolerate this. And so after talking with Ron Hansen, you know, we sort of decided that potentially one way you could do this is culture the fish in earthen ponds for year 1 and then transfer them to recirculating aquaculture systems in year 2, for instance, knowing that the wrasse is more expensive. Some problems with the offshore culture potentially is regulatory issues with striped bass, but I've been notified recently, just now, today, that apparently they are approved again for culture in Mexico. Really what we're looking at then is when it comes to economic feasibility of growing these animals. Like I said, we technically can do this. We know how to grow striped bass. The question is it cost effective and can be good and profitable? And so I think for some of the species like this that are well established, and that we just have to go through and figure out some of these last details. It's not about the culture or the biology of the fish anymore. It's more about the money. So I think that's where we stand right now.
Thank you. We have any questions for our panelists on the species that they covered? Questions from the audience?
So you can have specific questions to an individual panelist, or you can have general questions to the whole panel. Go ahead, and this is the opportunity. Since I've restricted it so much during the talk.
Ben,
Yes.
Don't you? No.
Yes, Rick.
Don't you think that the industry that's selling the hybrid striped bass would just automatically switch on over to the striped bass, so you don't have to reinvent anything? It just raise the fish and sell it to the same people. They would prefer, in my experience, they have always preferred the straight stripers, but they took the hybrids because they couldn't get the straight stripers.
Yes. It's excellent point. I like that you answered the question too. I like that.
Well, I want the right answer.
I agree. It's a very good point. So I started off the talk by saying that the reason why we decided to raise hybrid striped bass to begin with was because of a crash in the striped bass fishery, right? And it was decided upon that the hybrid was probably the better thing to culture because you got issues of red tail and all these other traits in the stripers because of stress. These are the kind of things that we've bred out. We haven't seen red tail in a long time, for instance, whereas that was a major problem, right? The other thing is this. When we look at the hybrid striped bass industry, that animal is a, whatever, 1.25 pound to anywhere to 2 pounds, right? We've already identified that the majority of people who want the striped bass, they want a 3 to 6 pound fish. And you're really not going to be able to, I don't think, grow a hybrid striped bass to that larger size. So I almost look at like two different markets. You've got the hybrid striped bass market, which, as you may say, some people might just switch over and say, we're just going to start raising stripers. Or we can have people diversify their farm. You raise the hybrid striped bass for the smaller size fish. You still go to those markets. And then you diversify by then also raising striped bass, and that's the larger fish for the
Yeah, I think it's an education problem for the growers. The time that it takes to grow a hybrid striped bass to 2 pounds, you've got a 3.5 to 4 pound striper, and you're selling it by the poundage. You've got twice as much poundage to go ahead and make profit off of. I think it's an education problem.
Yes.
Could I please make a copy of the presentation of the speakers so I can finish going tomorrow? I think it must be on here.
We are finished. We closed it. We have it in the master folder.
Okay, you'll keep
This is great to have you all here. I have to say, I'm a veterinarian with NOAA. And one of the issues that's come up with us, and I've been hearing, is we've got health and disease issues we need to do a little bit more research on, but also therapeutics. You know, in the U.S., we only have 3 antibiotics that are FDA approved, and none of them are approved for marine use. So talking to sponsors, drug sponsors, and talking to groups who are in coordination with other government agencies, can you prioritize therapeutic needs and uses so we can potentially get not just new drugs online, but new uses that are of current drugs that are already approved? So changing the label, getting it expanded for marine use. Is there a way to think about, can we prioritize those drugs and then bring them to this coordinating organization, we call it the DOG, it's an MOU through several federal agencies, and bring that up to them to say, okay, we need to put this on the priority list.
Who wants to address that?
I'll take an initial stab. I mean, we have a vet on our staff. Actually, she's giving a talk tomorrow, Dr. Connie Silvernail. She was a co-author on my paper. Yeah, we would love to do that. I mean, obviously, I think we would all agree that we need as many tools as we can get. It's really limited right now, and so we would certainly do that with the species that we're working on. You know, I would defer to Connie to help with that process, obviously, and you know, for each of the species that we're working on, come up with a prioritized list. So.
I would just say as a user of these products that we are limited by those tools, so I'm only familiar with what we typically can use, such as fluorphenicol or oxytetracycline, with extra label scripts by the veterinarians, and then working closely with your fish health professional in developing autogenous vaccines. I mean, that's sort of the experience that all the farms that I've worked with, you know, you have to go through the process of discovering the bugs of concern and finding out which ones you need to focus on, and then develop a tool such as an autogenous vaccine, because there may not be one available, a biologic that you can buy, and that's happened, that's the usual process. So I think I was a little confused with you asking the question because I don't know enough about the treatments and the medications. That's why we work with fish health professionals to help guide us, or me, I should say.
For cobia, it would be a vaccine against Photobacterium dumpsella. That's the major problem. And once there is an outbreak, it's very difficult to cure. You're going to load the feed with antibiotics and all that. So we need to develop a vaccine. There is already a vaccine that is being, I believe it's efficient to a certain extent, but not completely. We're still losing a lot of fish in the cage due to Vibrio. It used to be Vibrio, now it's Photobacterium.
Yeah, not to belabor that point, but I would really opt to have vaccines in place of these antibiotics. And I think especially coming from a place like Washington State, where you're really going to have a problem using that kind of thing in a net pen. So what I think we need to do is really go and develop really efficient vaccines. So,
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Other questions?
Thanks. I think that for most of these species, early days of talking about commercialization, but is the primary product form everybody's thinking about whole fish? Is that how they're going to be sold, or is there any development of product forms other than that?
I think for the Kampachi, we're selling whole fish into distributors. We're actually going to be at the Boston Seafood Show rolling out our King Kampachi from Mexico next week, so do come by booth 3445. Little plug. But it's, you know, when it gets to distributors, they'll mainly fillet it and then be selling fillets or portions. We view the real growth opportunity here is when we go to an IQF fillet portion that's 6 or 7 ounces that in broadline restaurants, then that can be used. And then we view success for this species when we're in IQF portions in a bag in the freezer at Costco across the country. And that's what we need to be. I mean, if we're going to reduce the beef consumption in this country, we've got to be providing people with fish that they really want to eat and making it available.
Yeah, same with, you know, again, as what Rick said with the hybrid striped bass situation, you know, the smaller fish, the 1 1/4 to 2 pound fish, that's a whole fish market, right? The 3 to 6 pound fish is a fillet market. And in the case of Pacifico, that's a frozen fillet at Whole Foods in the frozen section. So that's nationwide. I can go to Cary, North Carolina, into Whole Foods and buy a frozen striped bass fillet there. And I'd like to add, you know, again, with the scalability here, I actually did a little bit of math. And if you take McDonald's Corporation, for instance, they sell 300 million filet of fish sandwiches every year. And if you look at the average weight of the filet of fish, that's 43 million pounds of walleye pollock. And if you look then at excluding catfish, if you look at the next 4 largest aquaculture industries in the U.S. and you accept a very liberal dress-out weight of 40% for bony fish, if you combined all 4 of those industries together, they could not meet that order. And so I think the scalability is definitely should be considered.
Black sea bass, the ideal fillet size is 6 to 6.5 ounce, which you need to grow your fish to 1.75 to 2 pounds to get. You can get a premium size price for a smaller fish and increase your turnover. You're better off doing that.
Well, if you would ask me in one sentence to define why is it that marine fish aquaculture works in Asia and in Europe and it doesn't work in the United States, the answer is very simple. It's because they eat the whole fish, small, plate size. And what kind of business plan works if you put 65% of what you produce in the garbage can? So plate size is the way to go. It's the only way to go, because if we're going to raise fish to a large size so that we can get a fillet, we're going to have a real hard time.
I would just add, unless you can use the other parts, then don't throw them away.
In terms of red drum production, we have a little bit more diversified product form. And it used to be market weight was around 3 pounds or so. And now we're actually seeing the chefs are pushing that to wanting a much larger size fish. So we're based on whole body sales, growing premium fish to larger sizes. They're wanting a 5-6 pound fish. And so that's a minute customized sector of the market. Most of our product forms are the highest value we get. We sell them live to Oriental Asian markets in the Houston, San Antonio area. That's your most premium. The majority of our fish are sold bulk, whole body sales. But then we also have both product forms. We have filleted and we have steaked forms. And you get about the same price for a steak form as you do for a fillet form. That's just one of the benefits of redfish having, recipes like blackened redfish and regional popularity, that there are requests for some other product forms other than just whole body.
Okay, so
if I can add to that, just adding to that, when I looked at putting a redfish farm down in Belize, went through the Boston Seafood Show, we looked at some of the equipment that's there. You can actually take the racks, after you fillet off the redfish, you have the rack, the leftover meat that's on the bones. There are machines that will take the meat off of those bones, put the bones in one pile, put the fish tacos in the other place. But you guys don't look at that. All right, that has to go through the processing plant. So it's a different group that has to look at that. But they are available. There is ways to use all of that stuff. Also on the cobia, the market, everybody went out because they couldn't get to the market size, which was the 11 kilos or something like that fish. That was what was coming out of the wild, and the market only had that available. The real market on cobia is 3 pounds. And that's like 4 months.
So I'm Michael Rubino with NOAA. I want to thank Paul Megan, Karen, Gene, Mike Rust, who couldn't be here, for organizing this, for working on these topics over the past couple of years. I don't want to upstage you, maybe you were going to ask this again as well, but we, NOAA and USDA, would be very interested in what you think the next steps are going to be in terms of filling these gaps on hatchery bottlenecks. If we're going to get to the commercial stage. And I realize it's a variety of topics. You've talked about many of them today. We have competitive grants programs that are available, but we may also, with your help, be able to sort of engineer other pre-competitive solutions to building hatchery capacity. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Please stay in touch with us. This is something we'd like to work on over the next year with you, given that this is such a critical issue for finfish industry in the United States.
And so we are kind of coming up on time, and one question I wanted to make sure we covered was, were there any species for commercially ready that we missed? Anybody in the audience have something that we didn't cover here today?
So the Jap...
I'm going to ask you to state your name and affiliation, because Megan's going to call you and ask you to write it up here.
Russ Vedder, Senior Scientist, Southwest Fisheries Science Center, NOAA. I was always sort of anti-bluefin tuna culture, but the Japanese are on Jeff probably knows 6 or 9 generations in now, and feed conversions come down immensely with formulated feeds. And I'm starting to wonder if yellowfin or bluefin are just totally out of the picture, or if they're in the picture.
Dan can answer that.
There is a whole session on tuna tomorrow afternoon. There is a whole session on tuna aquaculture tomorrow afternoon. But the answer in the United States, obviously, is not. The yellowfin is this close. If there is an interest, there is a motivation, it can be done with all that. But the bluefin, we're still far from it. But come tomorrow to the session, because there will be presenters from all over the world, including from Spain.
So there are a couple other species that I'd like to point out that are commercially ready in the U.S. And one reason I think they were missed is this panel today is consistently all talked about food fish, whereas I see some other contributors, you know, like Courtney O's back there with pig fish and pinfish. I've done quite a lot of work with Atlantic Croaker. We now have commercial hatcheries, and there are people raising these in industry, and they oftentimes have much higher value than food fish do. And so some of these species are commercially ready, available. They're being produced. We have the technology. We have some of the market information. We're still working on some of that. Distribution is also a little bit of an issue in terms of delivering baked fish. But I just want to point out that there are a couple more species in terms that are available.
Thank you. On the bait fish, the mud minnows down in Florida, the Heteroclitus grandis, I tried to get the people down there to go ahead and start looking at that. They're doing it off of water that comes off the potato fields, and they got fundulas that are now 9 inches long, and those things are tough as nails. And that's one of the things that's already done. I did a little over 8 tons of mud minnows a year out of my farm, small farm. So, but that was all wild harvest. The only guy that was growing them was in Louisiana, and he's gone. You can't compete with the wild harvest, which is quick. But they are available.
American eel is one that's being worked on. There's a commercial startup farm in Maine that's doing pretty well. And in Canada, there's a significant research effort underway with launching a farm in the near future. So, you know, it's a species that's been grown in Europe for quite a while. High market price, high density. It's probably one that we're going to hear about more in the future.
George, is that wild-caught overs?
Yes.
Okay.
Any others? And maybe I'll throw a question to the panel then. We asked this morning, but any message for funding agencies? And, you know, maybe this kind of addresses what Mike was getting to, but anything that you want to say?
I think what we heard from almost everybody, I would say, you know, Ben is actively involved day to day in it, but it's the genetics part. It's with the framework that's out there now with the funding agencies being relatively limited, and of course we all realize that breeding programs take longer time, larger dollars. Is there any solution or innovative thinking that we might be able to do the hard work of selecting a couple of species that we can somehow find the resources to launch something of significance, not judged by me, but judged by the people that know genetics a lot more than me, to you know, help push the industry further down the road.
Anything else? Anybody else want to?
Again, speaking from a Black Sea Bass-centric perspective, I think John mentioned this earlier, that a commercial demonstration project is really helpful. Because I think there's like a mental block between a startup company and the level of investment needed to make it look attractive on paper. It's almost like a leap of faith. And I think if there can be some incentives to scale it up gradually using the available expertise and infrastructure, for example, university hatcheries and their available land, to maybe build one module of 2 tanks using the best RAS components out there that they think are going to be effective, cost effective, and demonstrate that it can produce a prescribed poundage over a given time, and that it generates the anticipated revenues. Then you have something tangible to move it up to the next level, which would maybe be a building with 2 or 3 modules. And that's a way of building technical capacity. And it also, I think it's good for the aquaculture industry because it involves experiential learning by students. It gives a model for public policy makers, for lenders, and it minimizes the risk for all the stakeholders. So I think it's just a win-win way to scale up gradually and build technical capacity.
Yeah, I don't want to make you feel bad, Michael and Paul and the other NOAA folk here, but I think this was not the reason why we have most of our commercial folks at the moment in Mexico, but it certainly helped. The Mexican government has a program where they're paying for 50% of the costs for our commercial hatchery there in La Paz, and that is certainly very appealing to investors when you've got programs like that, because it just helps minimise the risk. So it helps you get to a larger scale faster. Programs like that, I think, would be a great boon to this industry, where there would be matching funds that would come in alongside real dollars. So rather than setting up demonstration programs, I know on a small scale that works, but that's not going to move the needle significantly. What we need to have is significant investment, and any matching funds that can come in from government alongside that would help. And also, I can't help myself, because this is a drum the ocean stewards have been beating for a number of years. I think in Mexico they have what's called a fermento permit, which is a relatively easy to obtain permit that allows you to go out and do a short-term demonstration, small-scale project. And so long as it's with a native species, and so long as it's not over the top of any sensitive habitat, there really is no permanent damage that you can do in the marine environment. So you've got a bond so you're able to remove the equipment at the end of the fermento permit. But we all know the ocean is a great leveler, and that no matter how badly you've screwed up, within 6 to 12 months, if you're over a sand bottom, it's going to revert back to its pristine state once you remove the equipment. A permit process like that would allow you to go out and at a small scale with a native species, demonstrate the net pen culture. That is going to be a great boon to allow folk that are tinkering in their backyards with new cage designs or new species can go out and give it a shot, because that's what's going to make investors sit up and pay attention, is when they can see fish in the water and fish being harvested. And that's why we're so very grateful for Sea Grant's support for the demonstration project in the Gulf.
That's what I also meant when I was talking about pilot projects. Not pilot projects with just one entity, but like on a consortium of people. And for sure, the industry has to be at that table, but they have to also contribute to it. So in our case with sablefish, that's what I'm trying to promote, is to get an industry with some other entity, maybe the Jamestown Swellum, with NOAA, with academia, but everyone contributing into that. And the size of it, yeah, I agree. For some species, size means a big thing. For some of them, it could be really big, But for some of them, it's not necessary to be that large. But if the industry gets buy-in to that, I mean, it's just the next step. I mean, I've spent, I don't know, a really long time getting this fish to the point where we've developed all of these techniques to be able to produce it. But it's that point at which we get the industry involved in it so that they're actually going to take it on. And that's my idea of a pilot scale project. And like, it doesn't imply any particular size. It's just getting all those entities together. And perhaps like NOAA or USDA as an organization is not really the government agency that we should be looking at necessarily. I mean, NOAA's a part of the Department of Commerce. So the Department of Commerce itself at that level should be interested in promoting businesses. So maybe we should be looking for funding for at some other level. And I don't know what that level is, but maybe that's really where we need to be bringing some of that revenue into the stream there. So.
All right, I'll say it, no. These guys can't say it because they look at you, but I'm from the industry. I'm thinking, get off your high horse. You've got backing already from Pew Research Center that said, properly cited, nothing is detrimental about net pen operations. Even in the near shore, doesn't even have to be off the offshore. You already have, the Department of Commerce has already said, NOAA's already said that they're trying to increase the amount of aquaculture going on in marine resources. You've already got the backing. Someone's going to have to stick out their head and not get it chopped off by the NGOs. Just get some cojones.
And to follow that up.
They can't. You can't say it.
So before we go, because we're coming up against our time, but one important thing that we talked about in the opening this morning was kind of having a definition for commercially ready. Everybody has their own idea in their head of what it is. We've heard from our first panel, closing the life cycle, domestication is a box that has to be checked. The importance of having a market that's ready and available, the market analysis that encourages you to move forward. Anything else that this group would like to add to that, or any other thoughts on what it is to be commercially ready?
And this may lend itself to the funding question maybe a little bit as well, but it's got to be a team approach. It's not like one research lab getting their one USDA grant to be able to commercialize the species. It's got to be a nationwide group of people that involves the industry and several universities, and for us, ARS as well. You partner up with the people who can get stuff done, and also then for those of us at land-grant universities, you have to use your extension networks, like Chuck over here, that I can use from North Carolina Sea Grant. And then you really have to sort of have a large team approach to get some of these issues tackled, especially when you look at commercialization. You do all the research you want. That doesn't mean you're going to make money. That doesn't mean you're going to create an industry. You can have all the culture figured out, but until you get people investing their money and raising those things, nothing will happen. You need a lot of people, to help you get there. And you can facilitate that, but you have to find a team that will help you.
Okay, then before we go, I wanted to ask Megan, did you have any final thoughts, or Paul, or you don't have to? But, I wanted to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody. I thoroughly enjoyed today. I think it's been a really dynamic conversation today, and there's been requests for us to continue this dialogue at this forum. There's going to be a fast turnaround of a white paper from the discussions that we've had today, and we've got a lot of work to do, but I think we've got all the right components together to make that happen. So Another round of applause for everybody, and thank you so much.
The only thing I'd like to say is very much thank you to all the speakers today who have contributed, and panelists for their excellent expertise in addressing this issue, and also for the audience members who have participated and come to listen and learn about the topic, etc. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.